I never thought I'd be telling this story. But here we are. It started like any other morning on the ranch. The sun was just coming up, the grass still wet with dew, and the cattle were quiet, lazily waking up. My ranch is peaceful. It's private. And more importantly, it's mine. Every fence post, every tree, every inch of that land belongs to me. That's what made what happened so unbelievable. For months, I've been dealing with a woman from the HOA. You know the type, always watching, always complaining, always finding something to nitpick about. Her name? Karen. No surprise there. Karen lived in a neighborhood that wasn't even directly connected to my land, but that never stopped her from acting like she ran everything within a 10-mile radius. She called herself a community steward, whatever that means, but what she really was nosy. She would drive by my property slowly, windows down, phone out. She'd take pictures of my trucks, my fence, sometimes even my animals. One time she even had the nerve to complain about the way I stored hay bales. Can you imagine that? Complaining about hay on a ranch. But I kept calm. I figured maybe she's just bored. Maybe she doesn't have enough going on in her own life. Then one day, I found her standing on the edge of my property. She had actually crossed the boundary line and was snapping pictures of my barn. I approached her and calmly asked her to leave. She argued, said she was inspecting code violations. I told her, firmly, this land is not part of her HOA. She doesn't have any jurisdiction here. She scoffed and left, but I knew it wouldn't be the last time I saw her. And I was right. The real trouble started a few weeks later. I was in town grabbing supplies when I got a call on the radio. My own dispatcher informed me that there was a 911 call about unauthorized activity on a ranch property. The address was mine. I remember pausing. I even asked them to repeat it just to be sure. Yep, someone had called the cops on me, and I already had a pretty strong idea of who it was. So I put on my uniform, got in my cruiser, and drove back home. It was a short ride, but I had time to think. I thought about all the times I gave her the benefit of the doubt, all the times I ignored her little games. That was about to change. When I pulled into the gravel driveway, there she was. Karen stood there, waving her arms as if trying to direct traffic. The deputies who had arrived before me were already trying to calm her down. She pointed at my barn, yelling something about suspicious activity and unauthorized gatherings. She hadn't noticed who had just pulled up. I stepped out of the vehicle and started walking toward her. She didn't recognize me at first, but as I got closer, her whole face changed. Her mouth actually dropped open. It was like someone hit the brakes on her brain. I could see it all happen in real time. One moment she was fired up, thinking she was about to get someone in trouble. The next, she realized that I was a sheriff. You'd think she'd back down, apologize maybe. But no, not Karen. She doubled down, said I was impersonating law enforcement, accused me of corruption, even told my deputies they were being misled. My deputies looked at me, waiting for a signal. I stayed calm. I didn't raise my voice. I simply asked her to leave the property and warned her that she was trespassing. She refused. That's when I gave the order to detain her. The moment those cuffs came out, her entire attitude changed. All the noise, all the arrogance, it vanished. She went from yelling to whimpering. She tried to backpedal, saying it was a misunderstanding. But by that point, it was too late. The situation escalated quickly, and I wasn't about to let it slide this time. I had tried patience. I had tried reason. But when someone calls 911 on your own land, accusing you of crimes while trespassing themselves, enough is enough. And the crazy part? This was just the beginning. After she was handcuffed and sitting in the back of the patrol car, Karen kept repeating the same line over and over. This is a mistake. I know people. You can't do this to me. It was like she had rehearsed the words, thinking they'd somehow get her out of trouble. She was shaking, but still trying to sound in control. That false confidence, that arrogance, it was something else. My deputies stood back, quietly watching. They'd seen this type before. We drove her down to the station, processed everything by the book. Trespassing, making a false 911 call, interfering with an investigation. These aren't minor issues, especially not in our county. But the paperwork didn't matter to her. All she could focus on was that she was being treated like any other lawbreaker. That's what really set her off. She thought she was above the law. That somehow the HOA title she liked to flash around meant she had more power than the badge I wear. Now, let's backtrack for a second. Why would Karen even be on my property in the first place? She had this belief that because her HOA had some kind of outdated land use clause from years ago, she had the right to inspect neighboring properties for safety compliance. Mind you, that clause was for their own neighborhood, not my ranch that's been privately owned and registered in my family name for over 40 years. But Karen had twisted the rules in her head to fit her mission. She really thought she was protecting the community. So when she saw me building a new equipment shed near the edge of my property, fully permitted by the way, she convinced herself something illegal was happening. She called 911, claimed there was unauthorized construction and possibly stolen materials being moved. All lies. She didn't even try to confirm anything. She just assumed and acted. Now, when a sheriff responds to a 911 call and finds out the whole thing was fake, there are consequences. My team reviewed the audio from the call. Her tone, the urgency she tried to fake, the words she used, it was clear she was trying to weaponize emergency services. That's not just annoying, it's dangerous. What if real emergencies were delayed because of her? What if something worse had happened because deputies were tied up handling her drama? Word about her arrest spread faster than wildfire. Small towns are like that. You don't need social media when everyone's got eyes and ears on everything. By noon the next day, I was getting calls from other neighbors. Some were shocked. Some weren't surprised at all. Turns out, this wasn't Karen's first stunt. She'd filed multiple complaints with the county before, half of them unfounded. She once tried to find a neighbor for having a faded mailbox. Another time, she reported someone for planting non-native flowers in their yard. And yet, no one had ever pushed back this hard. Until now, when you live in a rural area, there's a kind of unwritten rule. You mind your own business. You help your neighbor if they ask, but you don't go looking for ways to make trouble. Karen broke that rule every chance she got, and now that it had caught up to her, she was scrambling. Back at the station, she tried to play nice, said she was confused about the property lines, claimed she thought she was helping. I listened to her, but I didn't let her off easy, because if there's one thing I've learned in law enforcement, it's that people like Karen don't stop unless they're forced to. She had gotten used to pushing people around with threats and paperwork. This time, that wouldn't work. She even asked if I could just drop it, since she didn't mean any harm. I looked her straight in the eye and reminded her that calling 911 without a real emergency puts lives at risk, that this wasn't just a petty squabble. It was an abuse of the system. That's when she got quiet. Not because she understood, but because, for the first time, someone held her accountable. But what she didn't know yet was that her HOA, the very organization she used to throw her weight around, was about to get involved, and not in the way she expected. Because this little showdown, it opened a door that revealed a lot more than anyone expected. And once it opened, there was no closing it. The next morning, I woke up to a string of missed calls. Not from the sheriff's office. This time, it was my lawyer, then the county clerk, and then, oddly enough, a reporter from the local paper. I hadn't even had my coffee yet, but I already knew Karen's stunt was starting to snowball. It wasn't just a nosy neighbor getting arrested anymore. Something much bigger was brewing. Turns out, Karen had filed a formal complaint with the HOA board, claiming I had unjustly detained her and threatened her property rights. Property rights? On my own land? You really can't make this stuff up. The HOA board, of course, panicked. They didn't want their name dragged through the mud, especially not tied to a trespassing case that made the front page of the local news. The headline read, HOA board member arrested after 911 call backfires on local rancher, who is also the sheriff. That alone was enough to set phones ringing across the county. Now here's the part Karen didn't consider. That land she kept sniffing around, it wasn't just my ranch. It bordered a large open stretch of land the HOA had been trying to buy up for years. What they didn't know was that a small section of that land, once listed under public easement, had recently reverted to private ownership. And guess who bought it? Me. Legally. Quietly. Months before this drama even started. I had planned to use it for expansion, maybe build a few cabins for weekend retreats. Nothing fancy. Just enough to bring in a little extra income and keep the land in good shape. But now, that land had become a chess piece in a much larger game. Because as soon as Karen tried to use the HOA's name to stir trouble with the county, she triggered an audit. Apparently, this wasn't the first time they'd stepped outside their legal bounds. Over the years, they'd issued fines that didn't hold up in court, enforced rules on properties outside their jurisdiction, and even pressured local officials to approve shady development plans. All under the radar. Until now, I didn't even need to push. The county did it for me. Investigators began combing through documents, maps, bylaws, everything. And with every file they reviewed, more issues came to light. Karen wasn't acting alone, it seemed. Several board members had been signing off on actions that went beyond their legal authority, fining people for how tall their grass grew on properties not under HOA care, issuing citations over park trailers, even harassing homeowners about holiday decorations. And guess what? A good portion of the neighborhood itself, where Karen and some other board members lived, had legal technicalities tied to that newly acquired land I owned. Because when I bought it, I also acquired a few easement rights they didn't realize were up for grabs, including a shared access road and water runoff lines that fed into their storm drain system. Suddenly, the balance of power shifted. Neighbors who once rolled their eyes but stayed silent about the HOA started speaking up. Turns out, a lot of people had stories. One guy said they threatened to tow his truck over a noise complaint because he worked on engines in his garage. A single mom got fined because her kids left bikes on the lawn for more than an hour. Everyone had a story. Everyone was fed up. And now, with legal documents and property lines being questioned, people were starting to pay attention. Karen, once smug and loud, went completely silent. She stopped showing up to HOA meetings. I even saw her car parked a few blocks away from her own house, like she didn't want anyone to know she was home. But the damage was done. Her actions opened the door to a mess far bigger than she imagined, and I hadn't even taken formal action yet. I was still watching, letting the truth surface on its own. But I knew the moment was coming, because when someone crosses a line over and over, thinking they're untouchable, it only takes one mistake to bring the whole thing down. And Karen? She made more than one. Word of the audit spread fast. Within days, neighbors were holding their own meetings, not run by the HOA, but by regular homeowners who were finally ready to speak out. It felt like something had snapped, like years of frustration had suddenly boiled over. People who never spoke at meetings were now stepping up, sharing their stories. There was this older couple, John and Linda, who talked about getting fined for putting up solar lights. Then a young veteran stood up and told everyone how the HOA threatened him for flying a flag that wasn't regulation size. Everyone clapped for him. It wasn't just about the flag. It was about the way Karen and her group treated people. All this was happening while Karen was nowhere to be seen. She hadn't been back to a meeting since her arrest. No apology, no explanation, just silence. Her supporters tried to act like everything was normal, but you could see it in their faces. They knew the tide was turning. I didn't have to say a word. The community was waking up on its own. Then came the real twist. A letter arrived from the county office addressed to the HOA board. It outlined a list of violations, some going back years: misuse of funds, overstepping boundaries, unlawful citations. It even mentioned potential lawsuits from affected homeowners. That letter changed everything. Suddenly, board members who were once loyal to Karen started distancing themselves. Some even resigned quietly. Others tried to blame her for the decisions they had voted on together. I wasn't surprised. That's how people act when the heat turns up. They look for someone to throw under the bus. And Karen was the perfect target. She had been the face of the HOA for so long, bossy, smug, always claiming she knew the rules better than anyone. Now, she was the one under investigation. But I still hadn't played my final card. That land I bought, the one tied to their access road and drainage system, I knew I could do more with it. Not out of revenge, but to finally fix what they'd broken in the neighborhood. I called a meeting with a few people from the county and some legal advisors. We reviewed every easement, every shared use agreement. And sure enough, everything was in my name now. That gave me the right to make decisions about how that land was used, including who had access to it. So I drafted a notice, a clear legal document outlining my plans, maintenance fees for the access road, restrictions on stormwater usage, and most importantly, a warning. Any further HOA interference on private property would be treated as trespassing. That notice was delivered to every home in the neighborhood, certified mail, with my name and title sign at the bottom. Sheriff, property owner, neighbor. The reaction was instant. Phones lit up again. This time, not in anger, but in gratitude. People thanked me for standing up. Some even asked if I'd help them form a new neighborhood committee, one that actually listened. I told them I'd think about it. My job was to keep the peace, not run people's lawns. But I was glad they were finally standing up for themselves. Karen, though, she was still quiet, but not for long. A few days after notices were sent, I got word that she had filed a complaint with the state attorney general, claimed she was being harassed by neighbors and targeted by law enforcement. The same law enforcement she tried to weaponize against me. I wasn't worried. Everything I'd done was by the book, fully documented. And besides, she'd made too many enemies now. People had seen the truth. They saw how power could be abused, even in a quiet neighborhood. And they were tired of it. That momentum wasn't going away. In fact, it was just picking up speed. The community was starting to imagine something different. A place where neighbors didn't have to fear fines or surprise visits from self-appointed HOA watchdogs. And all it took to get there was one person pushing too far. One mistake that unraveled everything. A week later, I was standing on my porch with a cup of coffee when a small silver car pulled into the driveway. I didn't recognize it first, but when Karen stepped out wearing oversized sunglasses and her usual fake smile, I had a good idea what she was up to. She walked up slow, careful, like she didn't want to spook me. I didn't say a word. I just waited. She started with some small talk, something about how the weather had finally cleared up. Then she asked if we could talk, just for a minute. I motioned for her to go ahead, still not saying anything. That's when she started with the real reason she came. Said she wanted to clear the air and start fresh, that everything got blown out of proportion, and that she never meant for things to go this far. She even laughed a little, as if the whole thing had been one big misunderstanding. I stared at her, wondering if she honestly believed any of what she was saying, or she was just desperate. Probably both. Then she asked me to withdraw the easement restrictions, said it was causing unnecessary panic in the neighborhood, that people were blaming her for everything, that she just wanted to move on. I let her talk, but inside, I couldn't believe it. After everything, trespassing, the fake 911 call, tried to get me in trouble with the board, using her position to harass people. Now she wanted me to forget it all? Pretend it never happened? I finally spoke. I told her this wasn't about revenge. This was about accountability. That when someone takes advantage of others for so long, they don't get to just walk away without consequences. And the fact that she was only here because things didn't go her way, that told me everything I needed to know. She tried to argue, said I was punishing the whole neighborhood, that the restrictions were petty. I reminded her that for years, she was the one punishing people. And now that the rules were being applied to her, suddenly it was a problem? She turned red. Her voice rose. She accused me of bullying her, of turning the town against her. I stood my ground. I told her I didn't turn anyone. People simply saw who she really was. They made their own decisions. Then she stormed off, muttering something about lawyers and retaliation. I watched her drive away, her tires kicking up dust as she sped down the road. And just like that, the fake peace offering was over. But it didn't stop there. The very next day, a post went up on the community's message board. It was from one of Karen's old allies on the HOA board. It blamed me for creating division and weaponizing property rights, called me a rogue sheriff, tried to paint me as the bad guy. But this time, the post didn't get support. Instead, neighbors started replying. One by one, they shared their stories again. Screenshots, letters, fines, threats. Every reply made it clear they weren't falling for the narrative anymore. That board member deleted the post a few hours later, but the damage was done. More residents called for a full disbanding of the HOA, not just a reshuffling, but a total wipeout of the corrupt system that had ruled their lives for years. I kept out of those discussions. I didn't want to be the center of attention. I just wanted the community to find its own voice, and they were doing just that. The difference was incredible. People who never talked before were now chatting in front yards. Kids were playing outside without their parents worrying about someone filing a complaint. Flags went up. Lawns got a little wilder. It was messy, maybe, but it felt alive. Meanwhile, the county continued its investigation. A few more subpoenas were issued. Some HOA board members started lawyering up. Karen? Last I heard, she'd put her house on the market. No for sale sign, just a quiet listing. Try to leave without drawing attention. But folks had already noticed, and they weren't letting it slide. The shift was real, and it all started with one person finally saying no. No to the bullying. No to the fake authority. No to being pushed around on land that had been his family for generations. All I ever wanted was peace and privacy. But when they brought the fight to my doorstep, they learned what happens when you push the wrong person too far. A few weeks passed, and the neighborhood looked almost unfamiliar. The signs that used to warn about HOA violations had started disappearing, one by one. No one bothered putting them back up. The tall, stiff fences that once kept people apart didn't feel so intimidating anymore. Neighbors were leaning over them now, chatting and laughing. You could feel it in the air. People were finally breathing easy. But just because things were calmer didn't mean it was over. I was sitting in my office at the sheriff's department when I got a call from the county clerk. She mentioned that someone had tried to file an emergency injunction against me, something about abuse of power and interfering with community management. I didn't even have to guess who it was. Karen might have disappeared from public view, but she was clearly still trying to pull strings from the shadows. So I had the county send me the paperwork. When it arrived, I nearly laughed out loud. The entire complaint was a mess. No legal standing. No backing from any official body. Just pages of emotional rants written in legal jargon, trying to sound official. It was the last swing from someone who had lost control. I didn't ignore it, though. I forwarded it straight to the town's legal counsel, then made a few calls to some friends in the state's property commission. If she wanted to play legal games, fine. But she'd have to do it by the book and in the open. What happened next was unexpected. One of Karen's old associates, someone who used to sit on the HOA board and never once questioned her authority, reached out to me privately. He asked if we could meet. Said he had something I needed to see. I agreed cautiously. We met at a quiet diner just outside of town. He looked nervous, fidgeting with a folded manila envelope in his hands. He slid it across the table, without saying much at first. I opened it, and inside were copies of HOA meeting minutes. Unofficial ones, the kind that never made it to the public records. They documented secret votes, private fines, and even coordination with a developer who had been eyeing my land long before the HOA tried to claim it. It was all in there. He told me he was tired. Tired of watching Karen manipulate the system. Tired of being afraid to speak up. He said the only reason he stayed quiet for so long was because he didn't think anyone would believe him. But now, with the tide turning, he wanted to help make it right. That envelope changed everything. I took it straight to the county investigator assigned to the case. Within days, the investigation shifted focus. It wasn't just about bad governance anymore. It was about fraud, possible kickbacks, deals made in secret to benefit a few at the expense of many. More people came forward. A retired accountant who once volunteered to audit the HOA's books admitted she was pushed out when she questioned missing funds. A landscaper shared stories of being overpaid for small jobs, then told to donate the extra back to a community improvement fund run by Karen. The web was bigger than I thought. And still, the community stayed calm. That's what struck me most. No pitchforks. No angry mobs. Just people learning how to take control of their own neighborhood without fear. They held honest meetings in the local park, right there under the open sky. Families brought folding chairs and snacks. Kids played in the background while adults talked about what kind of future they wanted. They weren't just rebuilding their neighborhood. They were rewriting the rules. I started getting invites, not as sheriff, but just as a neighbor. They wanted me there, to listen, to share what I knew. Some even asked if I'd consider helping draft a new charter, a document that would finally protect the rights of property owners, not punish them. It was tempting. I told them I'd think about it. But deep down, I was already proud of what I saw. They didn't need a sheriff to lead them anymore. They just needed someone to stand up first. And even though Karen was still trying to claw her way back with letters and lawsuits, no one was taking her seriously anymore. That power she once had, it was gone, stripped away not by force, but by truth, by unity, by neighbors who decided enough was enough.